Chapter 6 is our study in North America still. We're moving north from the United States to the country of Canada. And in Lesson 1, we're going to begin to study the physical geography of Canada. Our objectives for today's lesson are to identify the provinces, cities, and towns in Canada using a map. We're going to use a timeline to discuss significant events in the history of Canada, and then identify and locate and describe the provinces of Canada in terms of the geography and climate. Lastly, we're going to analyze the importance of Canada's major bodies of water. Now, Mr. Shane has a couple resources in front of him. The first of which is his online textbook that opens up to our chapter opener, the place and time feature that has the map, and then obviously this tab that opens up your reading to lesson 1. In that reading, you could also choose to listen to the text during the course of this lesson. I also have in front of me my note page. Now this note page is assigned online. It's not a paper form of notes, it's an online form in which this is an editable PDF. Notice you can click on any of these blanks and you can type in here to add your own content. You can even add your name at the top. So where you would find something like this would be in the student section. If I go back to the opening page, let me go to my student textbook because this is where you would log in and this is what it would look like. To open up our content for Chapter 6, Lesson 1, you'd click right here, put it on Chapter 6, Lesson 1. But to find the assignment page, the notes for this section, which would be titled The Guiding Reading Activity for Lesson 1 in Canada, you'd find it right here in one of these blue tabs. If it's not one of these blue tabs, you click the See All button. And this will open up to show you all of the assignments. It'll probably include Mr. Hosbach's content, but it would also include this assignment itself. So to have your notes out, you have to come and find it on this initial page. And here's what that note page looks like. In the first portion, we're talking about the physical landscape. Your directions are to complete the table with information about Canada's physical landscape. So you see here that you've got the different regions that we're going to read about. You're familiar with those regions because you're picking one of the provinces in those regions for your Canada project to do more research. Here's where those regions are going to be helpful for your research because they're going to be filled in by the time we're done reading about the location, landscape, and climate of that specific region, maybe pertaining to that specific province that you've studied. So here, you're filling in the missing information, and it kind of follows in order the sequence of our reading. We'll fill that out together. In the second section, we're learning about the bodies of water, and here you have to label each description with the correct body or bodies of water. Here you're given the description, and you have to match those based on our reading. Let's get started. First thing I want to do today is to get familiar with where these provinces are because you have to obviously select one of these to be studying. So here's a map that shows you all the different provinces in Canada. Here on the right hand side or the eastern part of the country you've got Newfoundland and Labrador. It's kind of funky shaped part way out here. Here you've got Prince Edward's Island. On this continued east coast, the Atlantic Ocean area, you've got Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So 1, 2, 3, 4 different provinces in this area. Now as we move more inland, you've got Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia in what would be we consider the southern portion of Canada. The north to us, because it's further north than us. In the way northern portion, you've got the Yukon, which is attached to Alaska here, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Now, to get familiar with these, I've assigned an optional link for you on your Google Classroom page that opens up to Cetera, where we practiced and tried to learn the different states of the United States. Here's our map quiz game for Canada. You can open up this link and then pick on where those. If it's helpful to you, on your actual connected page, you might want to go to what is the chapter opener. And that chapter opener has the map or the place and time here. Place and time portion that has the map that would be helpful for you to study to match those things up. So the first part of the game says we're Saskatchewan. If I look on the map, looks like this is Saskatchewan. Prince Edward's Island looks like this island right here, this tiny little guy. Ontario is right here north of the Midwest, closest to us. Nunavut's way up north. Nova Scotia over in this eastern region. The Yukon Territory up here attached to Alaska. Alberta, which is in this north. Labrador, Newfoundland, way over here on the east. Quebec right next to it. British Columbia to the west. Manitoba, right here dead center in the middle. Northwest Territories, obviously in the northwest, and New Brunswick. So that's all of those. You can use the map that's on page 177 to become more familiar, or play that game if that's the way in which you want to go about learning where those territories are. Now, let's get into the actual reading of what the physical landscape looks like in those territories. Canada's physical landscape. For millions of U.S. residents, another nation, Canada, is a short drive away. Canada is a vast and sprawling land of some 3.86 million square miles. The size Canada is larger than every nation in the world except Russia. Canada and the United States share the longest undefended border in the world. Several of the crossings along this 5,523-mile border are busy. About 400,000 people and $1.4 billion worth of goods cross it every single day. An overview of Canada. Although huge, Canada is home to relatively few people. Its population ranks 36th in the world. The great majority of these people live in the southern part of the country, and almost 90% of them live within 150 miles of the Canada-U.S. border. Now, I wonder why that is. 150 miles from the border to the United States and north is where most of the people live. Well, as you go further north, you're going to get into a relatively Arctic area. So living in this region is going to make a lot more sense because that's going to be more hospitable to the weather and the climate that's going to be more comfortable and easier for people to survive in those areas. Canada is divided into smaller units. The main divisions are Canada's 10 provinces. Provinces are administrative units similar to states. Each province has its own government. Canada also has 3 territories. The territories are lands administered by the national government. Canada's provinces and territories can be grouped into 5 groups. The Atlantic provinces. Now here's where we're going to go to our notes because our notes page matches up with each of the different provinces, the regions that we're talking about. We'll fill in where those are located and the landscape as we read. The first one, the Atlantic provinces. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador are called the Atlantic provinces. These 4 relatively small provinces border the Atlantic Ocean. We should probably fill that in the location. Border the Atlantic Ocean. These 4 relatively small provinces border the Atlantic Ocean, except for Newfoundland and Labrador. They are distinguished mainly by lowlands and plateaus. Highlands cover western Newfoundland and Labrador. Much of the Atlantic provinces has a humid continental climate. Winters are cold and summers are warm. Toward the north, winters can last as long as 6 months. To the south, winters last only 4 months. More rainfall falls here than in Canada's interior. So we've got the climate filled in as we just read. Now the landscape. One really good strategy to use here is to read through it once and then to go back specifically and maybe reread to find in that specific information. So it asks about the landscape. Here in the first paragraph it described the landscape as mainly lowlands and plateaus. Highlands cover the western Newfoundland and Labrador. Mostly lowlands and plateaus except for Newfoundland and Labrador, which are covered with highlands. Make sure that you've got that capitalized. And we've got the first one taken care of. We continue. Quebec and Ontario. The provinces of Quebec and Ontario reach from the St. Lawrence River and Great Lakes to northern Canada. They are the heart of Canada and home to more than 6 out of every 10 Canadians. The land along the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes tends to be a lowland plain with fertile soil. A massive plateau called the Canadian Shelf covers the northern area of these 2 provinces. A shield is a large area of relatively flat land comprised of ancient, hard rock. This plateau extends south, east, and west of the Hudson Bay. The shield holds many valuable minerals such as iron ore, uranium, gold, and copper. Like the Atlantic provinces, the southern parts of Ontario and Quebec have a humid continental climate. Temperatures are colder to the north than to the south, and winters are longer. In the northern part of these 2 provinces, a subarctic climate prevails. These areas have long, cold winters and mild summers. Much of the northern parts of these provinces are covered by forests that include coniferous and deciduous trees. Coniferous evergreen trees produce cones that hold seeds, and they have needles instead of leaves. These are similar to a pine tree or a Christmas type tree. Deciduous trees shed their leaves in the autumn. Rainfall and relatively mild temperatures give the southern edge of these 2 provinces a longer growing season than areas in northern Canada. That combined with fertile soil makes it a productive farming area. Let's use our rereading strategy to make sure that we've got those items filled in correctly. If we go back and find where the location of these two provinces is, I might need to use my map because I was working from this eastern to western portion. I know that this is Quebec here, and this is Ontario as you're moving from this east to west, so Quebec in Ontario. Said that 6 out of 10 Canadians live in this region. Where would it be then located? We're going to describe it as from the St. Lawrence River and Great Lakes to the north. It's also known as the heart of Canada. Right? So this entire way down on the southern border is where the Great Lakes are located and the St. Lawrence River that comes all the way out to the Atlantic Ocean. The landscape is filled in and described for us. The climate is not. If I go back down to the second paragraph in this portion, it talks about the subarctic climate of the northern portion and the humid continental climate of that southern portion. Humid continental climate in the south, colder temperatures and longer winters in the north. In the south, it's warm enough, kind of similar to our climate here in Wisconsin, to where there's good farming and productive farming that can happen in the summer months. In the north, the summer is actually so short because the winter is so long. There's so much snow and ice that builds up that there isn't much of a growing season or a green season in that time. It turns into summer and can get relatively warm, but not where it's going to be scorching in the 80s and 90s like we would experience maybe here in a hot summer day. The next region is not labeled, but you know as we're working our way through our textbook that the next one is probably going to be the Prairie Province. So I'm going to fill that in right away and then go through reading the entire thing and then use my rereading strategy to come back to fill in the specific information. Looks like what I'm looking for here is just the climate to fill in because it's already got the location and landscape described in my notes. The Prairie Provinces. The Prairie Provinces comprise Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. They are covered chiefly by plains extending north from the United States. As in the United States, the plains are tilted from west to east. Their elevation is higher in Alberta than in Manitoba. Highland areas rim the plains of the northeast and the west. The northeastern highlands in Manitoba are part of the Canadian Shield. The western highlands in Alberta are the eastern edge of the Canadian Rockies. The flat land of the Prairie Provinces receives cold blasts of Arctic air from the north. The average daily temperatures in January from Regina, Saskatchewan is -1 degrees Fahrenheit. Summers are much warmer, with the average temperature in July being 67 degrees Fahrenheit. The prairies have reached the highest temperatures ever recorded in Canada. On one hot day in 1937, 2 communities in Saskatchewan had temperatures of 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Precipitation in the Prairie Provinces is light. The area receives only about 15 inches of rain or snow each year. Now those Prairie Provinces comprise of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. If I'm looking at the map again, that's these three right here. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. These three in the middle. And they're called the Prairie Provinces because in the United States they lie just north of the region that we would call the breadbasket, kind of the Great Plains area here. And you've got the Rocky Mountains that are going to come down this western slope or this western area. So these are the relatively flat lands in this region that are next to those mountains. Very similar to how the United States is shaped because of the connection in the geography to where these items are. If we go to our notes, it's described as north of the Great Plains of the United States. In the landscape, it's the plains tilting from west to east, the highland areas to the northeast and west, so it's higher in the west, sloping downward, just like the Great Plains. The climate that's described here is cold Arctic air from the north in the winter, some really just drastic climate changes or extreme temperatures, and warmer temperatures in the summer. Now they've got low precipitation because of the rain shadow that's created because of the Rocky Mountains. All right, we continue. After the Prairie Provinces, we have described here British Columbia. Let's read. The landscape of British Columbia is like that of the northwest United States. The Rocky Mountains tower over the eastern edge of the province. A deep valley and plateau separate the mountains from another high range farther west The coast mountains. The Canadian Rockies include 30 mountain peaks that reach more than 10,000 feet. They are also home to 5 of Canada's national parks. The coast mountains rise even higher. Several of them soar more than 15,000 feet. Inlets of the Pacific Ocean cut the mountains along British Columbia's coast. Steep cliffs rise directly from the water to heights of more than 7,000 feet. British Columbia has a marine west coast climate. Temperatures are mild because warm air blows west from the ocean. Rainfall is heavy in some areas, as much as 100 inches per year. The location that's described for British Columbia, if you're looking at the map, is this portion right here all the way to the west, right on the west coast. The location north of the northwestern U.S. So here's where you have the states of like Oregon, Washington, Idaho. Here's where British Columbia is, just north of that northwest region in the United States. As it's also described, our rereading would take us to the landscape, saying that this is covered in mountains, deep valleys and plateaus, inlets and cliffs of the west coast. If you were to look at the United States in the map of Canada in a physical region, you'd see here that this is where a lot of that higher elevation is, where those Rocky Mountains continue from the United States into this region. So from the east so far, we've learned about the kind of lowland and the Canadian Shield Shelf, this plateau in this region. As you move further west, you've got these Great Plains or the prairie provinces here, and as you're now getting to the west, these massive heights in elevation. Lastly, we're going to read about the northern lands. Canada's 3 territories, Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon Territory, lie to the north. Those regions are right up here, these 3 in the north. If you look at them in the physical map, you can see those in this top northern portion. Again, the Yukon is connected to Alaska. You've got Nunavut with this archipelago of many, many islands, and the Northwest Territories that falls right in the middle in the, again, northwest. We continue. The Arctic Ocean laps their northern shores. Within that ocean lies an archipelago. An archipelago is a group of islands. Some of roughly 1,000 islands are tiny. Baffin Island, though, is nearly 200,000 square miles, larger than the state of California. The vast center of these territories is covered by lowland plains to the east. The rim of Canadian Shield rises. The shield continues onto the islands north of Hudson Bay. The western part of the far north has high mountains. Among them is Mount Logan, Canada's highest peak, of 19,524 feet. Much of the land of the territories called the far north is covered by a subarctic climate, marked by cold winters and mild summers. The areas farthest north, however, have a tundra climate. The name of the climate zone comes from the landscape. A tundra is a flat, treeless plain with permanently frozen ground. Permafrost, or permanently frozen ground, as in it never gets warm enough to actually thaw that ground. So the northern lands are described as this region on Canada's northern shores bordering the Arctic Ocean. So up here you have the Arctic Ocean, and it's mostly a subarctic climate. As it's described in terms of its landscape, we would say that this is mostly covered by lowland plains, the Canadian Shield to the east, and high mountains to the west. If we looked at our reference, here's mostly plains. You've got the Canadian Shield that comes here and high mountains to the west. That matches up. Lastly, the climate that's described here is mostly subarctic, with cold, harsh winters, mild summers. The far north has a tundra climate, and a high latitude climate, meaning it's really, really far away from the equator. If you're measuring on the lines here, really far away from the equator, the further you're getting to the North Pole, the more that's going to be almost completely frozen. And it is described as being completely frozen because it's described as having permafrost, as in the ground never thaws in that region. Now, the next portion of our reading takes us to the study of the bodies of water. And you've got 2 pages on page 182 and 183 to read on your own. The key information I'd like you to take away is that there are 3 oceans that border Canada, are the Pacific, Atlantic, and Arctic. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans are transportation routes for shipping. The St. Lawrence River provides great access to the interior of Canada. Here's again a look at that St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. So from the Atlantic, the Gulf of St. Lawrence comes in here, and you're now amongst the different territories and provinces in Canada. You can travel all the way through this region where you've got the United States to the south and Canada to the north, and get into the Great Lakes area really close to Milwaukee. So it connects Canada and this interior portion of the United States to all other parts of the world through this travel route. Now what I'd like you to do in your assignment to finish this up is to read through these 2 pages on your own, to identify and label each description with the correct body of water. So as you're reading, you're going to come across these descriptions in the reading and then fill in what those would be appropriately for these 10 portions. And then your assignment outside of taking your notes in this online fashion is to complete the quiz. Again, I advise you to use your rereading strategy to go back and answer those quiz questions. God's blessings.